Good evening. A cold wind swept across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace. London had barely woken, yet the palace gates were already surrounded by reporters. Camera flashes cut through the gray morning like lightning. Inside the palace, tension hung in the air. The reason was simple. A scandal had erupted overnight, one that threatened to shake the royal household at its highest level, and at the center of it was Camilla, queen consort. It began with a headline that appeared on several major news sites just before midnight. Confidential royal correspondence raises questions about Camilla's influence. Within hours, the story spread across the internet. According to leaked documents, Camilla had allegedly attempted to pressure palace advisors into supporting a controversial charitable partnership linked to several wealthy donors. The reports suggested the donors expected royal endorsement in exchange for major financial contributions. Inside the palace, aides scrambled to understand what had happened. Had private communications truly been leaked, or was someone deliberately trying to create chaos? Regardless of the truth, the damage was already spreading because public perception was everything, and the monarchy could not afford even the hint of impropriety. In a private study inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles III sat at his desk surrounded by briefing papers. The king looked tired, not angry, not panicked, just deeply weary. His private secretary stood nearby. Your Majesty, the press is requesting an official response. Charles rubbed his forehead slowly. How credible are these allegations? The secretary hesitated. The emails appear authentic, but their interpretation is questionable. Charles sighed. The problem is that interpretation is exactly what the media thrives on. Outside the study window, reporters shouted questions at palace staff entering through the gates. Charles knew what was coming, another storm, and storms had a way of leaving permanent marks on the monarchy. That afternoon, a black car pulled into the palace courtyard. When the door opened, Prince William stepped out. He had been summoned urgently by his father. William walked quickly through the palace corridors, greeting staff with a polite nod but little conversation. He knew the situation was serious. Inside the king's study, Charles stood as William entered. Thank you for coming so quickly. William sat across from him. I saw the headlines. Charles gave a small, tired smile. Hard to miss them. William leaned forward. How bad is it? Charles slid a folder across the desk. William opened it. Emails, meeting notes, correspondence between Camilla's staff and several private donors. The language wasn't illegal, but it was delicate. William closed the folder slowly. This will explode if it continues. Charles nodded. That's exactly my concern. Meanwhile, in another wing of Buckingham Palace, Camilla met with her own advisors. Her expression was calm but firm. This story is ridiculous, she said. One advisor nodded. Your Majesty, the emails were taken completely out of context. Camilla crossed her arms. They always are. She had spent decades dealing with public scrutiny, but this situation felt different because now she was queen and the monarchy's reputation was fragile. Have you spoken with the king? The advisor asked. Camilla shook her head. Not yet. But she knew Charles was already weighing the consequences. Back in his study, Charles paced slowly. William watched him quietly. The monarchy survives on trust, Charles said. William nodded. And when trust is shaken, Charles finished the sentence softly. Someone must restore it. He stopped walking and looked directly at his son. For years, I've prepared you for this. William frowned slightly. For what? Charles exhaled slowly. For the day you must take greater responsibility. Charles walked back to his desk and opened a small red leather folder. Inside was an official document, royal authorization papers. William's eyes narrowed. What is that? Charles spoke carefully. It's an executive delegation. William stared at him. You're handing over authority? Charles nodded. Not the throne, but operational control of royal decisions. William leaned back, stunned. Because of this scandal? Charles answered quietly. Because the monarchy needs stability. He placed the document on the desk between them, and right now, you are the person the public trusts most. For a moment, William said nothing. The weight of the decision was enormous. Father, this is drastic. Charles smiled faintly. Leadership often requires difficult choices. William shook his head slightly. But what about Camilla? Charles paused. That's exactly why this must happen. He explained carefully. If I appear to defend her too strongly, the press will accuse me of favoritism. And if I remain silent, they will assume guilt. William understood. Charles continued. But if you oversee the response, the public will see impartial leadership. Later that evening, William returned to Kensington Palace. Inside the living room, Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat reading news updates on a tablet. She looked up as William entered. That bad? William dropped into the chair beside her. Worse. He explained everything: the scandal, the leaked emails, the king's decision. Catherine listened carefully. When he finished, she asked quietly, And what do you think? William stared at the floor for a moment. I think the monarchy is entering another difficult chapter. Catherine placed a hand on his arm. And you're ready for it. William looked at her. Are we? She smiled softly. We've been preparing our whole lives. The following morning, William held his first strategic meeting as the king's delegated authority. Senior advisors gathered in a conference room at Buckingham Palace. The mood was serious. William spoke calmly. Our priority is transparency. One advisor nodded. That will reassure the public. Another added, but it may also intensify scrutiny. William didn't hesitate. Then we face it directly. He paused. The monarchy survives by confronting challenges, not hiding from them. The advisors exchanged impressed glances. William's leadership style was different from Charles's, more direct, more decisive. Later that afternoon, Camilla requested a private meeting. William entered her sitting room with respectful formality. Your Majesty, Camilla studied him carefully. So it's true. William didn't pretend to misunderstand. The king asked me to oversee the response. Camilla sighed. He's trying to protect the institution. William nodded. Yes. Camilla's expression softened slightly. I never intended to create this situation. William answered honestly. I believe that. Camilla looked at him thoughtfully. You always were very direct. William allowed a small smile. I learned from watching the family. When the palace announced William's new authority, the reaction was immediate. News networks ran the story across the world. Prince William takes operational control of royal affairs. King Charles delegates authority amid palace scandal. Commentators debated what it meant. Some saw it as a sign of crisis. Others saw it as the monarchy preparing for the future. But public polls showed something clear. People trusted William. That evening, Charles met William again. They walked slowly through the gardens of Windsor Castle. The sky glowed orange with sunset. Charles spoke quietly. You handled today well. William shrugged slightly. It was just the beginning. Charles smiled. You underestimate yourself. William looked at his father. Do you ever regret the weight of this role? Charles thought for a moment. No. He gestured toward the castle behind them. This institution is larger than any individual. William nodded. And now it's partly my responsibility. Charles placed a hand on his shoulder. It always has been. Over the following weeks, the palace addressed the scandal carefully. Investigations clarified the situation. The media storm gradually faded. But one thing remained clear. William had stepped into a new level of leadership, and the public had noticed. One evening, William stood again in the gardens of Kensington Palace. Catherine joined him. You've been busy, she teased. William smiled. That's an understatement. She slipped her hand into his. The monarchy is changing. William looked toward the distant lights of London. Yes, Catherine asked softly. Are you ready to lead it? William thought for a moment. Then he answered with quiet confidence. I'm ready to protect it. And with that, the future of the monarchy, shaped by tradition, crisis, and courage, continued moving forward under the steady watch of the Prince of Wales. The new revelations came from an anonymous palace staff member. Documents had been sent to several media outlets overnight, meeting transcripts, internal briefing notes, private communications between senior aides. None of the material directly accused Camilla of wrongdoing, but it created a troubling picture. According to the reports, a small group of royal advisors had been quietly lobbying to give Camilla greater influence over certain royal charitable funds. The suggestion alone was enough to spark controversy, because royal charities were supposed to remain above political or financial pressure. Inside the palace, senior staff gathered urgently to discuss the damage. And now, with Prince William holding operational authority, the responsibility for responding fell directly on him. William sat in the conference room at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by advisors. The large oak table was covered with documents, newspaper clippings, digital reports, legal summaries. One advisor spoke cautiously. The source of the leak appears to be someone within the palace staff. William's jaw tightened, meaning someone close to the decision-making process. Another advisor nodded. Exactly. William leaned back in his chair. Palace leaks were rare, but when they happened, they often signaled deeper problems: internal divisions, personal rivalries, or someone trying to manipulate the narrative. William spoke calmly. We focus on the facts. He paused. No speculation. The advisors nodded. William had made something clear from the beginning. His leadership style would be disciplined, measured, and transparent. Later that afternoon, William returned to Kensington Palace. Inside their private sitting room, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reviewing briefing notes. She looked up as William entered. More leaks? William nodded. Yes. He dropped into the chair beside her. Someone inside the palace wants this story to keep growing. Catherine closed the folder in her hands. Why? William thought for a moment. There are always people who believe chaos benefits them. Catherine studied his expression. You're handling this well. William gave a tired smile. I'm trying. Catherine reached for his hand. Remember something. What? The public isn't watching palace politics. They're watching how you lead. William looked at her thoughtfully. Sometimes Catherine had a way of simplifying complicated situations, and she was right. Leadership was not about eliminating every problem. It was about responding to them with integrity. Meanwhile, Camilla sat quietly in her private sitting room inside Buckingham Palace. The atmosphere felt unusually lonely. For decades, she had fought to earn acceptance within the royal family and the public. Now she felt the walls closing in again. Her advisor entered carefully. Your Majesty, the new leaks are circulating widely. Camilla nodded slowly. I assumed they would. The advisor hesitated. Some commentators are suggesting the palace itself may be divided. Camilla gave a soft, bitter laugh. The palace has always been divided. She stood and walked toward the window overlooking the palace courtyard. But now those divisions are visible. The advisor spoke carefully. The Prince of Wales is managing the situation. Camilla looked back over her shoulder. Yes. Her expression softened slightly. And he's doing it very well. At Windsor Castle, King Charles III followed the unfolding events closely, but he remained deliberately distant. This was William's responsibility now. One of Charles's senior aides entered the study. Your Majesty, public confidence in the Prince of Wales appears strong. Charles smiled faintly. I suspected it would be. The aide added something interesting. Many commentators are describing him as the monarchy's stabilizing force. Charles leaned back in his chair. That's exactly what the monarchy needs. He paused thoughtfully, and exactly what William has always been. William ordered a quiet internal review of the palace leak. Not a public investigation, not a dramatic announcement, just a careful examination of who had access to the documents. The process was handled by senior royal administrators and legal advisors. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The leaked material appeared to originate from a mid-level communications office, someone with access to internal discussions, but not someone with direct authority, which suggested something troubling. The leak might not have been about exposing wrongdoing, it might have been about influencing public opinion. During the crisis, one royal figure quietly stepped forward to help stabilize the situation: Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Sophie had long been known inside the royal family as one of its most reliable and level-headed members. She met privately with William at Buckingham Palace. I thought you might appreciate another perspective, Sophie said gently. William smiled slightly. I always appreciate yours. Sophie reviewed the situation carefully. The leak isn't really about Camilla. William raised an eyebrow. You think it's about the monarchy itself? Sophie nodded. Someone is testing the system. William thought about that and seeing how leadership responds. Sophie smiled knowingly. Exactly. The following morning, William made a decision that surprised many inside the palace. Instead of releasing defensive statements or denying every claim in the press, he chose openness. The palace issued a short but powerful announcement. The royal household would conduct a full review of its internal governance procedures for charities and partnerships. The review would ensure transparency and prevent future misunderstandings. The statement did not accuse anyone. It did not attack the press. It simply acknowledged the need for clarity, and it was signed by the Prince of Wales. The reaction was immediate. Commentators praised William's calm leadership. Political analysts described the move as smart crisis management. Public opinion polls showed something remarkable. Trust in the monarchy had not declined. In fact, it had slightly increased because the public saw something refreshing: honesty, accountability, and steady leadership. That evening, Camilla asked William for another private meeting. He joined her in a quiet reception room. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Camilla said something unexpected. You handled this very well, William replied respectfully. I'm trying to protect the institution, Camilla nodded, and I appreciate that. She paused before continuing. You know something, William? What? The monarchy needs your generation. William tilted his head slightly. Why do you say that? Camilla smiled faintly. Because the world is changing faster than it ever has before. Later that night, William shared the conversation with Catherine. She listened carefully. Then she said quietly, Camilla understands something important. William looked at her. What's that? That this moment isn't about scandal. It's about transition. William nodded slowly. The monarchy was entering a new chapter, and whether they wanted it or not, they were already leading it. Weeks passed. The palace investigation quietly concluded. The leak was traced to a staff member who had believed they were exposing potential conflicts of interest. The individual was reassigned. The controversy faded. But something lasting remained. The public had seen William lead during a difficult moment, and the confidence it inspired was undeniable. One evening, Charles and William walked together through the gardens of Windsor Castle. The autumn leaves rustled beneath their feet. Charles spoke softly. You handled the crisis well. William shrugged slightly. I learned from watching you. Charles smiled. Perhaps? He paused before adding something meaningful. But I believe the monarchy's future is in very good hands. William looked toward the castle, toward the centuries of history it represented, and toward the responsibility he would one day carry. He didn't say much, but the quiet determination in his eyes said everything. The late afternoon sky over Windsor Castle glowed with a deep amber light as autumn clouds drifted slowly across the horizon. Inside the castle walls, preparations were underway for a meeting few people knew about. Not even most palace staff had been told, because what was about to be discussed would quietly shape the future of the British monarchy. At the center of it all were three figures: King Charles III, Prince William, and Catherine, Princess of Wales. In a private drawing room deep inside Windsor Castle, a fire crackled softly in the fireplace. Charles stood near the window, gazing across the vast castle grounds. When William and Catherine entered together, he turned with a small smile. Thank you both for coming. William nodded respectfully. You said it was important. Charles gestured toward the chairs near the fireplace. It is. As they sat, the king took a moment before speaking. The recent scandal involving Camilla, Queen Consort, had shaken the palace more deeply than the public realized. The press storm had faded, but the internal consequences were still unfolding. Charles spoke quietly. The monarchy is entering a period of transition. William leaned forward slightly. You mean because of the scandal? Charles shook his head gently. No. He paused. I mean because the world is changing. The king reached for a leather folder on the table. Inside were several documents outlining the future structure of royal duties. For decades, Charles explained, the monarchy has relied on tradition to guide its role. Catherine listened carefully. But tradition alone isn't enough anymore, Charles continued. The public expects transparency, compassion, and relevance. William nodded slowly. That's why you delegated authority to me. Charles smiled faintly. Yes. Then he looked directly at Catherine. And why your work has become so important. Catherine looked slightly surprised. My work? Charles nodded. Your focus on early childhood development, mental health, and family support has connected with people in ways the monarchy hasn't achieved for years. Catherine spoke softly. I'm simply trying to help. Charles gave a warm smile. And that's exactly why it works. William studied the documents on the table. What are you proposing? Charles answered calmly. I want to formally restructure how royal responsibilities are managed. He pointed to several pages outlining a new system. Certain initiatives would now be overseen directly by William and Catherine. Strategic public engagement, charitable coordination, community outreach. William looked up. That's a massive shift. Charles nodded. It's necessary. He paused before saying something significant. The monarchy must gradually prepare for the next generation of leadership. Catherine spoke thoughtfully. Won't this create tension inside the family? Charles sighed softly. There will always be tension, he added quietly, but clarity prevents confusion. William understood what his father meant. For years, royal roles had often overlapped. That sometimes created internal competition. Charles wanted a clearer structure, and he trusted William and Catherine to lead it. While the meeting continued at Windsor Castle, Camilla sat quietly in a private sitting room at Buckingham Palace. She had received word that Charles, William, and Catherine were meeting. She didn't know the details, but she understood what it meant. The monarchy was evolving, and her role within it was changing. Her advisor entered gently. Your Majesty, would you like an update from Windsor? Camilla shook her head. No. She paused. Not yet. For years, she had fought to earn acceptance. But now she felt something unexpected relief, because the next chapter of the monarchy didn't need to revolve around her. Back at Windsor Castle, the meeting continued. Charles suddenly asked William something unexpected. How are the children handling everything? William smiled slightly. They're doing well, Catherine added warmly. They're curious about royal life, but still very much children. Charles chuckled softly. That's good. He spoke thoughtfully. One day, Prince George of Wales will carry the crown. William nodded. And until then, we protect his childhood. Charles smiled approvingly. Exactly. Later that evening, as William and Catherine prepared to leave Windsor Castle, they encountered George in one of the long corridors. He had been visiting his grandfather with his siblings. Hello, Grandpa, George said politely. Charles smiled warmly. Hello, George. Nearby stood Princess Charlotte of Wales and Prince Louis of Wales, whispering and giggling together. George looked up at his grandfather thoughtfully. Grandpa, is it very hard being king? The adults exchanged amused glances. Charles knelt slightly so he was eye level with the boy. Sometimes it is. George considered that seriously. But you help people. Charles smiled. Yes, George nodded firmly. Then it's worth it. For a moment, no one spoke. The simplicity of the child's words carried surprising weight. Later that night, Charles stood alone in the castle library. He thought about George's comment, then about William and Catherine. The monarchy had survived wars, scandals, and centuries of change, but its future depended on something simple trust, and the next generation seemed ready to earn it. Back at Kensington Palace, William and Catherine sat together after putting the children to bed. The palace was quiet. Catherine looked thoughtful. Today felt like a turning point. William nodded. My father is preparing the monarchy for the future. Catherine smiled softly. And that future includes us. William took her hand. We'll face it together. The following morning, Camilla requested a private conversation with Charles. They met in a quiet drawing room at Buckingham Palace. Charles looked curious. You wanted to speak? Camilla nodded. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. Charles waited patiently. Camilla continued. I believe it's time for William and Catherine to take a larger public role. Charles studied her carefully. That's a generous perspective. Camilla smiled faintly. It's also the realistic one. She paused. The monarchy must look forward. A week later, the palace released an important statement. It outlined a new structure for royal initiatives. William and Catherine would oversee several major national programs. Camilla would focus on her established charitable work. The announcement emphasized unity within the royal family. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Many commentators described it as a modern evolution of the monarchy. One evening, William stood in the gardens of Kensington Palace watching the city lights of London. Catherine joined him. You're thinking again, she teased gently. William smiled. About the future? Catherine asked softly. Does it feel overwhelming? William shook his head. No. He looked toward the palace windows where their children slept. It feels like responsibility. Catherine slipped her arm through his, and we'll carry it together. Above them, the night sky stretched quietly across the city, and inside the royal family, a new chapter of leadership had begun, led by calm strength, shared responsibility, and the steady preparation for a future king.